Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I take a sip of tea before I add another page into my Wonder Journal. And for this Wonder Journal, I'm going to be taking a look at the Jordan River. And if you haven't seen the other entries, I'll have those listed down below so you can take a whole look at that playlist. What I'm doing is I'm starting off with, once I move my tea there, with a little washi tape so I can get a nice border around here to prevent me from painting on the upcoming pages because I'm bad about that. I'll be using the Lamy All-Star mechanical pencil, and this is my Tombow Mono Zero eraser. I'll have all of these supplies listed below, even the sketchbook here. This is a cold press paper sketchbook. I absolutely love this one. I think even their regular sketchbooks are my favorite sketchbooks, and I'll have that listed below where you can find those. I believe I bought this one on Dick Blick, so I'll have that listed below for you. How I'm starting out on this is taking a look at my reference photo, and again, reference photo will be down below. And I'm looking for anything that kind of maps out the area for me so I can paint the landscape. I'm not going to get every detail in. I'm not looking at painting every leaf and every blade of grass, only the important ones. And I just kind of want to mark those in very, very lightly. So my pencil is going to be going all over the place. I'm going pretty lightly with it. Like I said, I'm going to come back over it in a minute and we'll talk about that. But while I am sketching this out here, I'll tell you a little bit about why I chose this particular picture. If you're unfamiliar with my Wonder Book series, what I like to do is take things I'm wondering about from my Bible studies, either something that doesn't make sense in my mind or something I just find kind of interesting and want to know more about. This happens to be one of those that didn't make sense in my mind. So I chose this picture and this location because three biblical things take place here. This is where the Israelites cross over the Jordan into the Promised Land. It's also where Elijah was taken up to heaven, and in the New Testament, this is where Jesus comes to be baptized. Now, the vantage point of this is looking downriver on the Jordan as it heads toward the Dead Sea, and the location is at Qasr El Yahud. Now, this is on the West Bank Israeli side. There's another side identical over on the Jordanian side, which is at El Magdas, also called Bethany Beyond the Jordan. But I couldn't find a good photo that just represented the river, that didn't have any structures or any people in it, because this is a pilgrimage site on both sides of the river. So this is the one I found. It was free over on Wikimedia Commons, and I didn't use the whole thing. I just used a portion of it. But that's why I chose this particular picture on the West Bank side, because it was the best one I could find. Before we go on with the story, let's take a look at what I'm using. This is a Prismacolor Dark Umber PC 947 colored pencil. I love these. They're very soft, very buttery. Again, I'll have that listed down below. You can purchase these just one pencil at a time. You don't have to purchase an entire set. So if you're interested in that, again, I believe you can get these at Dick Blick, but I'll have it all listed right down below. I bought this in a set, so I'm not certain what they have over on Blick, but I will find that for you. What I'm doing with this pencil is kind of what I do if you've watched any of my videos and I go over my pencil lines with a fountain pen. Instead of doing that, I didn't want the harsh lines. I wanted everything to be pretty soft. So I decided to use the colored pencil, and the brown one particularly because this is kind of a brown earthy picture. I used a gray one, a gray pencil in the piece before this, but I really wanted something brown for this. And I found this one in all of our art stuff. Finally found a dark brown. I thought the dark umber was really good for this. So I'm using, kind of like I do with a fountain pen, I'm using thick and thin lines. So those weighted lines are going to allow me to define the width and define the shading. And you'll even see me come back. You can already see there are areas where I actually shade this in. And what we're going to use to paint over this is Graphitint. And Graphitint's a little bit different than watercolor. If I were using watercolor, I would still be able to see this colored pencil underneath, and it might be a bit distracting, or I have done it before where the colored pencil actually adds to it, but I didn't want that to show through, and I'm trying to use Graphitint through this entire book. And you'll see once we put the Graphitint on here, this just allows me to kind of shade everything in and not have to paint so much. Once I get to the painting part, it really helps me to identify the light and dark areas. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and shade all of this in. I already have the light pencil marks on there, but by coming back with this colored pencil, I can really pick out and kind of define those areas that are my landmarks. And I'm going to go ahead, this area that I'm shading in here is the water. I know it's kind of hard to tell right now, and when I put the color on it, it's going to be a muddy looking color because it is muddy. So this is just going to help me get those shadows in there. So when I put the paint on, I can still see it slightly, and I'll know where to come back and put the shadow. But again, the whole purpose of this is just to get a roadmap. Some artists like to just start painting for a landscape. I'm a planner. I always like to plan it out. So this is just me planning all of that out. So while I'm filling this in and getting all of those lines in, let's look at a few more things about the river. Before I get into the Bible story that led me to look up the Jordan River, let's take a look at a few more facts about the river itself. The river starts up in the north between Syria and Lebanon on Mount Hermon. It flows southward through northern Israel, and it goes down to the Sea of Galilee, and then it comes out again on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and it divides the Israeli West Bank from the Jordanian side. And then it keeps going down for about 200 miles of all this meandering around until it ends up in the Dead Sea. And this makes it the lowest river on earth because the Dead Sea is the lowest point on earth. So it goes all the way down to the Dead Sea. When I looked up pictures of this river, it is a very narrow river. Right at this point, where we have the pilgrimage site at Bethany beyond the Jordan and Qasr el-Yahud, it is only about 15 feet across, and it's not that deep. So there is actually a border between the two, so you can't cross between the two countries, but you could go out to the middle, walk out, and touch the hands of somebody on the other side. So it's a very narrow river. And some spots in the river are only about 3 to 10 feet deep. So it's not deep. When I'm thinking of a river, I'm from the South, and I think of the Mississippi River. It's a very fast flowing, very wide river, especially around Memphis, Tennessee, which is an area I'm familiar with. And so that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about the Jordan River, but that's just not so. Let's take a look at what I have now because we're getting started with the coloring part. This is a flat brush from Winsor & Newton, and then I have from Derwent Ink Tints, I have their Baked Earth pencil. I have a cloth and just a cup of water, and these are the Derwent Graphitint. I'll go ahead and show you those. We're not using those right this minute, but these are the ones that we're going to use. And the first thing we're going to do is take that Derwent Ink Tints, and this is an ink-based water-soluble pencil. So once I put it on here and I activate the color with water, it's not going anywhere. When it's dry, it's on there. And I need that underneath. I like to have a good base. I want it to look kind of aged since this is old. I want to give it that feel. But also, I don't like working on a white piece of paper, and this just kind of helps me get my colors in the right area where they need to be as far as values, and it gives me something that's not just a white surface to work on in the background. So I'm gonna go ahead and activate all of this on here, and then I let it dry, and once it dries, I'll come back and paint on top of it with the Graphitint. And like I said, none of this is going to move. Here are the brushes that I'm using with the Graphitint. Again, these are Winsor & Newton. It's from their Cotton series. I have a size 6 and a size 3 round because I have some areas that are wider and some that are smaller. So I really like round brushes, so that's why I chose that one. On the screen, I'll have those colors for you. And you notice that I started with a little bit of water in the palette and then put the color over to that. That's so we can transfer that color and not waste any product. It just kind of helps it to come out of your brush and go to the palette a little bit better. Here's what I'm going to do with the sky. I'm painting all of it in, but there are some light clouds, very, very soft in the background. The wonderful thing about this, as you can see, I'm coming with just a little bit of water in my brush and I'm wiping it off, and I can pull up some of that Graphitint. It makes it like an eraser the water does on the brush, like an eraser on graphite. It just kind of pulls that right up off the paper. And you can do that with regular watercolor, but to me, it just works so much better with the graphite. You can go down all the way to the paper with it, which is why I'm putting on one base coat right now. So this whole layer that you're seeing me paint on, this is our first layer. We'll have a couple of layers on here before we're finished. And with each successive layer, I use less and less water. Kind of like I do when I'm using gouache, a little less water so I don't pull anything up off of the layer before. Because if you want to with graphite, this Graphitint, if you add some more water to your brush, even when it's dry, you can really pull some things up. And I've seen people paint their Graphitint and they don't wait for the layer to dry. They want to come back and paint something else on top, and when they do, they kind of have a muddy mess. So you want to let that dry. If you're wanting to layer and add other colors on top, but you want some colors underneath, you're going to need to paint it in layers. And as you're painting, you'll notice when I come back to the palette to get paint on my brush, I will swirl that paint. You saw me swirl it. The little graphite flecks in there will kind of separate from the color. And if you want to get a consistent color on your paper, I have found that I get a more consistent color if I swirl it. So you'll see me swirling it every time I go back, and that's to keep that mixed up. You can probably zoom in on your screen right now to my palette and you'll be able to see that graphite kind of separating out. So that's why I'm doing that. And you notice you can see those colored pencil marks underneath. They're going to slowly start to disappear as we add on the successive layers. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the reference photo and I'm taking a note of what colors are underneath. So this is going to be green, but it's kind of a yellow green. So I'm adding the yellow green in. I'm adding a little bit of that blue to the meadow so that it will create more of a green for me, a blue green. That's what I'm adding in here. I do allow my colors to line up together like that, kind of juxtaposition, because they'll go ahead and flow together. I'm working on dry paper. This is wet on dry, but I'm using enough water in my brush so if these colors want to blend together, they can do that. You can see that area where I was just painting, where the yellow and the green come together. I can get a little water on my brush and go ahead and come back and blend those in together so they don't look just juxtaposition. They'll actually blend really, really well. This area has not completely dried, but I am coming back with that gray-green and going on top because I don't mind in these areas if it gets a little muddy because these are my shadow areas. I just wanted to clarify that. You know, I was telling you don't paint on it until it's completely dry, but in this instance, these are my shadows, and that's okay with me because I'm trying to go ahead and block in all of those lights and darks before we add all of the detail layers. Just a few more brush strokes here and we will have the first layer completely done, and what you're not seeing is the drying time. This was actually the next day. It takes me a couple of days to work on these. I have physical limitations, so I can only paint for like 20 or 30 minutes at a time. But I have a new palette of colors over here. It's actually the same colors. I've just simply put more on there for this day's painting. So you're not seeing anything any different. These are the same mixes of color. However, the thing that has changed is that there is more color and less water. And I'm using a different kind of motion with my brush. I'm not doing a realistic, photorealistic type painting. I'm doing more of an impressionism type painting. While this was a good photograph, excellent photograph, I'm not going to see every little detail. It was taken from a distance and I even zoomed in on it. So when you're painting trees from a distance like this, you're not going to see individual leaves. You know they're there. Your mind tells you that they're there, but you're going to see little shapes of light and dark. So that's what I want to indicate here. And by moving my brush and these little, what I used to say to my students are dots and dashes, it gives you more of that impressionism feel. So that's what we're going to be using on this layer. Now that we know a little bit more about the Jordan River, and I hope you can kind of tell where the river is here in the picture. Right now I'm painting the greenery coming across, and those shadows are shadows on the river. And it's a muddy river, and you're looking at it going around a bend. So you're seeing trees and bushes in the front and trees and bushes behind it. So that's our vantage point at Qasr El Yahud. That's where we're looking right now. And this is the area where the Israelites crossed the Jordan over into the Promised Land. And this is where my question came about, because I like to see things. I like to get it in my mind. So when I'm reading about this in the Bible, I want to know what it looks like, because the thing that happened here, well, let me give you a backstory and we'll talk about what happened. And then I think you'll understand why I wanted to go look it up and find out what was going on and why it had to happen this way. So I'm going to read you a few verses, not reading a terrible amount, but this comes from the Old Testament in Joshua chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. And what has happened before this event, the Israelites had been in Egypt. Again, that's a whole story, and we won't go into all of that, but they have left Egypt, they have fled, and Moses led them out of Egypt. By this point in time, they have traveled for 40 years in the desert, and Moses has passed away. His successor was a man named Joshua. God comes to Joshua and says, it's time for the people to go into the Promised Land. And this is how it's going to happen. You're going to get the priests, and they're going to take what's called the Ark of the Covenant. That's where God's promises were kept, and only Levitical priests could carry it. The priests are going to take it to the river, and the minute their feet touch the river, the waters will stop flowing, and all of Israel can cross the Jordan River. So again, in my mind, I'm thinking Mississippi River, but that's not what we have here. We have the Jordan River. So let's take a look at what Joshua says happened after God spoke to him. Joshua chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. So it was, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priest who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest. So that's an important thing right there. That the waters which came down upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So The waters that went down into the Sea of Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. So this is the point where I had a problem with a river that's only about 15 feet wide and at some points only 3 to 10 feet deep, why they needed the rivers to stop flowing so that they could cross the river. And again, this is not a fast flowing, super wide Mississippi River. This is the Jordan River. So I had to do some more research, and I couldn't just go to biblical sites. I had to do research about the Jordan River. And what I found out was this. Yes, this is what the river looks like now. But it was probably wider in biblical times. The things that make it a little more narrow now are the fact that there are crops all the way around. So they use the river for irrigation. And you're not going to be irrigating your crops all year round because you're not going to be growing them all year round. So there are some points in time where the river is going to be a little more narrow when we see it today. Also, if you'll remember, I said that the river started at Mount Hermon. Well, when the snow on Mount Hermon, yes, can you imagine that there are snowy mountains in Israel? When I think of Israel, I think of a desert, but there are mountains, and up in the mountains, they get snow, and people actually go skiing there today. You can find videos of that online. As a matter of fact, I'm going to link one down below that I really enjoy this YouTube channel. It's Sergio and Rhoda in Israel, and they'll take you to all these places, and you can see what these places look like. And there's even one of the Jordan River. So there is a Mount Hermon, and there is snow on top. And when that snow melts, you're going to have water run down into the Jordan River. That is where all of this huge amount of water is coming from. This is taking place in the spring. And when the Israelites crossed the Jordan, it was in the spring of the year. According to the times, they had different times of sacrifices and different things that they celebrated different times of the year. And according to this point in time, what they were celebrating would have put this in the spring of the year. So all of that snow is melting. All of that snow is causing the river to overflow its banks. And that is why God had to stop the flow of the river to allow the Israelites to cross. When I am curious about something, I want to know more about it, and I go down rabbit holes. So I wanted to know a little bit more. And one of those rabbit holes, my daughter actually owns. It is a book called Antiquities by Josephus. And Josephus lived about 34 AD to 100 AD. And he was a Roman Jewish historian. So he kept up with the entire history of the Jews from the very beginning all the way through Jesus. All these wars and things that they did, he kept up with all of it. Here's what he has to say about the crossing of the Jordan River. And bear with me, it's a little long, but it's quite cool. Now, while Joshua, the commander, was in fear about their passing over Jordan, for the river ran with a strong current and could not be passed over with bridges, for there never had been bridges laid over it hitherto. And while he suspected that if he should attempt to make a bridge, that their enemies would not afford him time to perfect it. And for ferry boats, they had none. God promised so to dispose of the river that they might pass over it, and that by taking away the main part of its waters. So Joshua, after 2 days, caused the army and the whole multitude to pass over it in the manner following. The priest went first of all, having the ark with them. Then went the Levites, bearing the tabernacle and the vessels which belonged to the sacrifices, after which the entire multitude followed, according to their tribes, having their children and their wives in the midst of them, as being afraid for them, lest they should be borne away by the stream. But as soon as the priests had entered the river first, it appeared fordable, the depth of the water being restrained, and the sand appearing at the bottom, because the current was neither so strong nor so swift as to carry it away by force. So they all passed over the river without fear, finding it to be in the very same state as God had foretold he would put it in. So again, another proof that it actually happened. Let's talk a little bit more about the art. So at this point, I am wanting to put in the shadows along the bank and through the blades of grass that are hanging over the water, and all of the grass and sticks that are growing up through the water. And I chose green-gray to do that. I do not like using black for shadows. Stay away from black on shadows. Not all shadows are black. And this green-gray has a little bit of a green tint to it. It's hard to tell on the screen, but in person, yes, it does. And I know it looks like this set might have some black in it. The closest thing to black is graphite gray, and that is in the upper right-hand corner on that palette. I don't use that very often. I like to make my own shadow colors, mixing things together. I will use it some when I need to, if I need to make sticks or limbs or something like that. But I like to use this green-gray. I discovered that on this particular piece. I thought this is great for shadows. The thing you have to remember, though, when you're working with this Graphitint, if you put it on and you think, oh, that is way too dark, I'm going to need to lift that, leave it alone, because once it starts to dry and soak into the paper, it's going to mellow out. What I put on at the first of this segment when I started talking with you again has already kind of soaked into the paper and gotten lighter. So that is my process on this. I'm just going to be using that gray-green to get all of the shadows. Before we go on with more art, I want to tell you about another event that happened at this exact spot, the same spot where the Israelites crossed the Jordan. Now, yes, Elijah was taken to heaven, but the one I want to talk about is Jesus being baptized. And here's what it says in Matthew 3, verse 13 through 17. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. And John tried to prevent him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and you are coming to me? But Jesus answered and said to him, Permit it to be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he allowed him. When he had been baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water. And behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Now, how do we know that this is where Jesus was baptized? And by the way, John the Baptist was foretold. His coming was foretold. He is the voice crying in the wilderness, and he was foretold about 500 years earlier by Isaiah in the Old Testament that he would be the one that led the way for Jesus. So how do we know it was in this area? And we don't have any graffiti there that says Jesus was baptized here by John the Baptist. However, whenever there was an important location, what people like to do is set up a monument there. And you see that throughout the Old Testament. So what they started doing about 3rd, 4th century AD was they built churches and monasteries at this same spot and continued baptisms. So those can be found today. There's evidence of those being there to this day. Kind of a monument signifying that this was the spot where John the Baptist came and did the baptisms. And What does Josephus have to say about this? Well, he agrees that there was a John the Baptist and that he was a good man and that he did baptisms and that he was killed by Herod. He avoids the topic of Jesus, and the reason for that is because Josephus was not a Christian. So he does mention Jesus later on in his Antiquities. So again, further proof that all of this information had been saved in Jewish history. So let's get back to our art and finish up this Jordan River piece. This is the final day of painting, and I have the same colors that were there the day before, and the only thing I have done is wet my brush. As I said at the beginning, when we put on these successive layers, I'm going to use less water and more paint, and that's what we're doing here. This allows me to get all of those little blades of grass, and notice how easily I can paint on top and make those show up. So Graphitint layers extremely well. Next to Winsor & Newton watercolors, I think I like Graphitint, and for doing landscapes, I think I like it better than Winsor & Newton. I like the earthy colors, and you'll have to let me know in the comments if you want me to try this or not. I'm kind of on the fence. There is a company, a small family-owned company that makes watercolor that is from dirt, from the earth, and it kind of reminds me of a mix between watercolor and Graphitint. So let me know if you want me to get that and try it out. Like I said, I'm on the fence about it. I don't know. I'm thinking I like Graphitint. Do I really want to learn how to use that medium? But it might be interesting. Let me know what you think down below. But I'm going to keep adding the detail on here because this is our final layer of the piece. Those darks that I added in previously, that I said, just go ahead, don't lift any color, even if you think it's too dark, It is going to soak in and it's going to get lighter. That's exactly what it did. And some of the areas that I'm painting on right now were the ones I added the dark to the day before. So you can't get too much dark on things. It is going to get lighter once it dries. And for me, that's the whole purpose of coming back and putting on extra layers, because I like to do things a little bit lighter and kind of build it up. But with the dark, you can start off really dark and you'll still have to come back and paint it again, add more layers, because it's just gonna kind of lighten up. And you'll see that I eventually just kind of wet my brush, get a very little bit of water on it, just enough to activate the Graphitint, and I start painting directly from the well. As we finish up the last few paint strokes on this piece, I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you were new here, I hope you'll subscribe and join us. I like to do lots of things, not just the Wonder Book. Right now, that's what I'm on because there were several things that interested me, and I thought I kind of want to get those put down on paper and share them with you. But I have some gouache projects coming up. I'm going to do some more watercolor, and I'm thinking about doing some mix on things like the ink tints along with watercolor. So I have a lot planned for this year. I hope you'll join me for those things. But until then, my friends, I'll see you in the next one.